Your phone lights up. A call from someone you know, someone you genuinely like. And your first instinct, before you even think about it, is to let it ring. You watch it buzz, you wait, and the moment it goes to voicemail, something in you quietly relaxes. You'll text them back in a minute, you'll say everything you need to say, and it will be fine. Actually, it might even be better than if you'd picked up. Most people call this antisocial. Some call it avoidant. A few will tell you, with real concern in their voices, that you're missing out on genuine human connection. But there's this entire growing group of people, across every generation, in every kind of life, for whom texting isn't a lesser version of communication, it's just the version that actually works. And what psychology is finding about these people is striking. Would picture this. You're in the middle of something. Your thoughts are finally lined up, and then the phone rings. Suddenly, you're expected to think out loud, to process information, formulate a response, monitor your tone, manage the silence, and track whatever they just said. All at exactly the same time. And you do it, you get through the call. But when you hang up, you realize you said about 60% of what you actually meant. The rest got lost somewhere between thinking it and having to say it immediately. Then you pick up your phone and text someone else. And the words come out right. The thought lands the way you intended it to. The person on the other end reads exactly what you meant, not a hurried approximation of it. And here's what nobody tells you about that difference. It's not shyness, it's not avoidance, it's not social anxiety in disguise. For a specific kind of mind, texting isn't the backup plan, it's the main channel. To understand why some people genuinely communicate better through text, you have to understand what a phone call actually demands of the brain, and how much of that demand has nothing to do with the conversation itself. When you speak in real time, your brain is running what linguists call a language production cascade. At minimum, 3 cognitive operations must execute in rapid sequence, and they have to overlap. You're constructing a message while simultaneously converting it into sound, while simultaneously monitoring your own output for errors, while simultaneously tracking what the other person is saying. Each stage is drawing on working memory. Each stage is competing with the others. Research on synchronous communication, conversation that happens in real time, confirms what this feels like from the inside. A study published in BMJ Open Quality found that synchronous communication is consistently associated with higher cognitive workload, more disrupted thinking, and greater baseline stress compared to asynchronous communication. The researchers were studying healthcare workers, but the cognitive mechanisms our general real-time demands force the brain into a kind of multitasking that has a measurable cost. This text removes that cost, not by making communication less demanding, but by decoupling the stages. You read the message when you're ready. You think you write. You can revise it. And when what's on the screen reflects what you actually mean, you send it. Think about that for a second. For many people, writing isn't a filtered version of their thoughts. It's the most accurate one. Here's what's fascinating. The preference for texting isn't evenly distributed, and the pattern of who prefers it tells us something important. A 2024 study published in Psychology of Popular Media by Didia, Trub, and Hassinger-Das at Pace University examined how introverted individuals communicated across different channels. What they found reframes the entire conversation. Introverts who use texting specifically to express themselves, not to escape interaction, but to communicate more fully, reported greater self-confidence than introverts who didn't have access to that mode of self-expression. The channel matched the processing style, and when that happened, the quality of communication actually improved. The study drew a crucial distinction, one that tends to get lost when people dismiss texting as avoidance. There is texting to escape, where someone uses messages to dodge connection entirely, and there is texting to express, where someone uses text because it gives their thoughts the space they need to become what they actually are. For the second group, text isn't a barrier to real communication, it's the condition that makes real communication possible. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the assumption that phone calls are more authentic, more genuine, more honest, more emotionally real, rests on a belief that has never quite held up under examination. The belief is this: spontaneity equals honesty. If someone responds immediately without thinking, that response must be their truest self. If someone takes time to compose a message, they must be performing, or filtering, or hiding something. But psychology says otherwise. When people are forced to respond in real time, under pressure, still without space to think, they often say what is easiest, not what is truest. Social expectation fills the gap. Habit fills the gap. The need to avoid awkward silence fills the gap. A message that has been written, shaped, and intentionally sent can carry more of a person than a response produced under the pressure of the moment. Now here's the part nobody talks about. A 2019 survey of UK office workers found that 70% of millennials experience anxious thoughts when the phone rings. A separate 2023 survey of over 1,000 Gen Z Australians found that nearly 60% dread making or receiving phone calls entirely. These aren't fringe numbers. This is a majority, or close to it, of entire generations who have quietly organized their lives around a different communication model. And yet the cultural narrative around this is almost entirely negative: telephobia, avoidance. A generation losing the ability to connect. But here's what those narratives miss. For many of these people, the preference for text isn't rooted in fear. Research by Liana Kim and Sang Hua found that communication channel preference is shaped by cognitive style, personality, and processing needs, not just anxiety. The people who reach for their keyboard instead of their phone are often doing so because text gives them something calls cannot: control over the quality of what they actually put into the world. Dr. Sherry Turkle at MIT, who has spent decades studying how technology reshapes communication, frames it this way: asynchronous communication allows people to maintain clearer boundaries between their internal processing and their social output. You don't have to give someone your unfinished thoughts. You can give them the thought complete. Wild, right? The people society calls bad communicators are often the ones who care the most about communicating well. And here's what surprised even the researchers looking at this. A study from the Journal of Experimental Psychology found that writing about thoughts and feelings increases self-awareness and emotional clarity in ways that spontaneous speech often doesn't. The act of putting something into text, of having to find the exact words, of seeing the sentence and deciding whether it's right, is itself a form of cognitive and emotional processing. Regular texters engage in this process dozens of times a day, not as a substitute for thinking as a method of it. People who communicate through text aren't avoiding depth. They're building it carefully, intentionally, word by word, in a format that lets them mean what they say and say what they mean. That's not antisocial, that's precise. Here's what people call you when you let calls go to voicemail: unreliable, cold. Difficult to reach someone who isn't really present, who keeps the world at arm's length through a screen, because real connection makes you uncomfortable. But here's what the psychological research actually calls you: deliberate, self-aware. Someone who understands that communication is not the same as performance, and who refuses to sacrifice the quality of your words to the speed of the moment. The people who prefer texting are often the same people who remember what someone said 3 conversations ago, who notice when a message feels off and ask if everything is okay, who craft a response slowly enough that when it arrives, the other person feels genuinely received, not just acknowledged. What looks like distance is often attention moving at a different pace. There's a difference between being hard to reach and being selective about when you're ready to be fully present. The phone callers of the world think presence means immediacy, always available, always on respond now, process later. But for you, presence means something different. It means showing up whole. It means giving someone your actual thoughts, not just the ones you could produce under pressure in 30 seconds. That's not a communication flaw. That's a communication standard. And the world is only beginning to understand the difference. If this resonated somewhere true, it's probably because you've spent years fielding raised eyebrows every time you texted back instead of calling. You're not broken. You're not cold. You're not afraid of real connection. You just understand that real connection deserves real words, and real words take a moment. If this felt like finally hearing the quiet part out loud, I think you'll connect with our video on the psychology of people who go silent when they're hurt. Because the same precision, the same care with words runs through both. And if no one has told you lately, you don't owe anyone your unfinished thoughts. The text is enough. You are enough. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated on my future uploads.